Or are we human beings becoming more demonic, at least by the standards of more ancient or more classical or more traditional civilizations? Well, I was reading Kenneth Grant's revival of magic recently, and in it he makes a very curious and interesting comment. And he says that people differentiate spirits only by thinking of one as visible and the other as invisible. But he says the real difference is that a human being is a microcosm, whereas a spirit is not. And that moreover, a spirit is a specialized entity, and human beings by definition are not. Now, what does it mean to be a microcosm? Well, of course it means that we somehow reflect the cosmos itself and the earth itself and all of existence, which of course in previous centuries would have been conceived of or believed to have been created by some kind of creator, by a god or by the god, depending on the religion. So we reflect the cosmos, we reflect the earth, we reflect what has been created by some creator deity. We, in a sense, have emerged out of the mind and reflect the mind of the creator, the thing that thought up the world in itself. Whereas a spirit has a function, it is essentially a functionary, unlike us. It does one specific thing, and that is all that it is meant for. It doesn't care, and it really has no bearing on the life of the spirit or the lesser being, whether Picasso and Braque invented Cubism, or Dali pushed Surrealism to its limits, or Yukio Mishima was an author and a martial artist and an actor, whatever it may be. These things do not interest a functionary, they do not interest a spirit and do not impact its life if it has a life. Now, in regards to being a microcosm, maybe we can think of the Renaissance period as the time when human beings were able to be multiple things at once and to integrate different ways of thinking and different ways of being to become a whole person. Leonardo da Vinci, of course, being a scientist but also an artist, and not restricted to one thing, but could be a genius in multiple areas of life. And this was not strange. But we, of course, in today's age are encouraged to be specialized and, in a sense, to be functionaries, which, if we go by Grant's definition, makes us much more like a spirit, some kind of lesser being. Think of chaos magic, for example, where the chaos magician even attempts or creates kind of servants or servitors to perform some function. And these, if you read Liber Null by Peter J. Carroll, it can even be associated with psychological complexes, some kind of, almost a kind of neurosis that's become so extreme that it acts or seems to act independently of the individual. But nevertheless, society itself is kind of pushing us to become such a specialized individual as a spirit. Well, what is it to be a microcosm? Well, it means that unlike a spirit that may do one thing, for example, create love between people, reflective of the planet Venus in some way and perhaps tied to it magically, we reflect all of the planets and beyond that. So we have the capacity to love like Venus. We have the capacity for war and battle and struggle and energy and martial prowess like Mars. And we have the capacity for reflection, like the moon reflecting the light of the sun. And of course, we have the capacity to think and to illuminate what is through our thoughts, like the sun itself, and to kind of govern the day as the sun does. So we have on the one hand the spirit, and on the other hand the human being as a microcosm. At least that is the potential for us. Well, this brings us perhaps back to the magical order. What is a magical order doing? Well, perhaps it is, in a kind of lesser sense, trying to create spirits or servitors or whatever it may be. But in regard to the human initiate, I would suggest it is trying, or at least it should be trying, to create whole human beings, in a sense rather like the Renaissance man, not trying to create some kind of one-dimensional being. Unfortunately, many occult and esoteric orders do try to create one-dimensional beings, rather like fundamentalist religions. But if it is functioning properly, I think we can say that yes, its aim and its work is to create the whole man, as it were, or the whole woman. In that regard, we can think about the symbolism of Freemasonry during the ritual. Not only the head, but also the arms and even the feet of the initiate are exposed. And I think to the modern individual, this may seem like some kind of jest or some kind of frat ritual, but in my opinion, this most certainly relates to the idea of the man as the microcosm, most especially the human being with his arms and legs displayed to represent a pentagram, such as we see in Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, which of course relates to Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. We want to be physically whole, but more especially we want to be spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, culturally whole. We don't want to be like a spirit, which is just one thing, reflective of a particular planet, let's say Venus to attract love, or Mars to create discord or war, but we want to be a whole thing, a whole microcosm. That is the aim of an esoteric or occult order. Well, I've said before, and I think I'm correct, that in some sense a occult order or esoteric order embodies, in a kind of systematic and conscious way, what's called a genius cluster. In certain times and places you get a cluster of individuals who are remarkable in some sense. So you get Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo at the same time and in the same place, kind of competing with each other. And this happens rarely, but it does happen. And certainly I've been involved in some very interesting groups, formal and informal. And what happens when you're around these people who are genius-like in different ways, perhaps. Perhaps one is a writer, one is an artist. Well, you can all kind of feed off each other and be inspired by each other, and more importantly, are introduced to novel ideas and things that you haven't heard of before, and probably would never have heard of if you had not come across these people who are in some way brilliant in other fields sometimes. And an occult order at its best, and certainly historically, if we look at the orders that are interesting, and when they were interesting, they tend to attract artists, writers, musicians, poets, people that are in some way extraordinary, or people who are, we might say, in contact with their daemon, the ancient Greek term, sometimes translated as genius, but also meaning a spirit, well, more literally the little god. So not a spirit in the terms of having one function, but a kind of little god, perhaps you could even say a kind of metaphysical microcosm that is between us, as reflective of the macrocosm and the macrocosm itself, the cosmos, the world, God, whatever is out there that we in some way reflect and embody. It's the thing that stands between us and it, the genius, a kind of conduit between us and it, a passageway or a corridor, just like we're walking through now a little bit, that connects us invisibly, and we have to find it. Notably, when we look at certainly 19th century orders, and well, going back to the 18th century as well, we find that there is an element of genius, I think, not just an interest in rituals, which could be compared to theatre, and very much are theatre in many cases, but music, art, literature, philosophy, ancient cultures, poetry, and so on. To be interested in these things is to become a kind of microcosm linked to all kinds of different aspects of life and the world, but also to enlarge oneself, one's own mind, in a very healthy way, to expand one's consciousness. Now, as I mentioned, we are becoming more and more pressured to be specialists, or in a sense functionaries, which Kenneth Grant relates to the spirit world, or to spirits, to lesser beings than the human, who is well-rounded, or all-rounded, a whole thing. And what can we do in this world in which we are inevitably forced to specialize? And of course, it is certainly true that we have at some point to pick a lane, but I think one thing we can do is not have our specialism become our entire life. When you meet someone new, they always ask you what you do, meaning what is your day job, how do you live financially, which it can be a shortcut for where were you born, what kind of parents were you born to, what kind of education did you have. So there is an element of that. It's certainly true that a fashion designer in Los Angeles probably has a very different life story, background and opinions on life than, let's say, a truck driver in Ohio, although I'm sure there are exceptions. So there is an element where it's a shortcut to know these things, but at the same time we should not identify as the one thing that we do necessarily to make money. We should see ourselves as a whole person and cultivate that whole self as well in whatever way we can. But to use rather modern terminology, we should think in terms of perhaps mind, body, and spirit. If we look back at even the barbaric Norse culture, you find Norse warriors who are praised are often praised for being poets, and sometimes even feared as well for being sorcerers. And so, these were people who had, in their rather rough surroundings and a world of danger and instability, perhaps something like we're entering again in a more technological sense, had conquered mind, body, and spirit. Or perhaps as our religion in the West has declined and is really collapsing and will collapse in the next 20 years, and most people don't believe in the traditional religions of the West, we have to find some other way of integrating mind, body, and spirit, even if we look back to the past as something of an example. But we can introduce meditation or hypnosis self-hypnosis into our lives, or mantra, also art, of course, and reading. And, hopefully being able to connect with people who would constitute something of a genius cluster, people who can inspire us in some way and lead us to some kind of awakening. Well, thanks very much. Check out angelmillar.com. I'll see you again soon.